My husband installed the cameras quietly, the way he did everything else that mattered to him. Without announcements, without conversations, without my consent. I only learned about them later, long after the damage had already rooted itself into the walls of our home. At the time, I still believed we were safe. I still believed love was something solid, something you could feel under your feet, like hardwood floors that never creaked. I still believed marriage was built on trust, not surveillance. That morning started like any other morning of my married life. The house was too quiet in the way only expensive houses get, insulated from the world, muffled by money and distance. Sunlight crept in through the sheer linen curtains I had picked out myself, settling across the kitchen counter where I had left a half-empty mug of chamomile tea from the night before. I had slept poorly. Again. My husband, Marcus, had left early again. I remembered hearing the garage door lift at around 5, the low growl of his engine fading into the distance, while I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks above our bed like they were constellations I could escape into. By the time I finally got up, my phone already had 3 missed calls from my mother, all sent straight to voicemail while it lay face down on the dresser. I didn't call her back right away. I needed a moment to feel normal. I needed to believe, even briefly, that my life was still my own. I moved through the house barefoot, my steps silent against the polished floor. I rinsed my mug. I opened the fridge. I stared into it longer than necessary, letting the cool air brush against my face as if it could wake something in me that had gone numb. Nothing felt urgent. Nothing felt wrong. That was the scariest part. When betrayal begins, it doesn't arrive screaming. It arrives politely. It makes coffee in your kitchen. It kisses your forehead and tells you it will see you later. Marcus had been acting attentive lately. Not affectionate, attentive. The difference mattered. He noticed where I went. He noticed when I came home. He asked questions that didn't sound like curiosity, but sounded like accounting. How long were you out? Who was there? Did you enjoy yourself? He smiled when he asked them. The same controlled smile he used in boardrooms and negotiations, but something about it never quite reached his eyes. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself stress changes people. I told myself marriage requires patience. Women are very good at telling themselves stories that keep them comfortable. It wasn't until 2 weeks later, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, that everything began to unravel. I had come home early from work with a headache that felt like it was splitting me clean in half. I remember unlocking the front door and pausing, just for a second, because the house felt different. Not messy, not disturbed, just watched. I shook the feeling off, blaming the pain behind my eyes, and kicked off my shoes near the entryway. I went straight to the bedroom, closed the curtains, and lay down without bothering to change my clothes. I don't know how long I slept. When I woke up, the room was dim, the light outside already slipping toward evening. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Marcus. "Everything okay? You got home earlier than usual." I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the screen. I hadn't told him I was leaving work early. I hadn't posted anything. I hadn't called. I typed back slowly. "Yeah, headache. Came home to rest." There was a pause. Then 3 dots appeared. "Okay, just checking, just checking." That night, I wandered the house differently. I found myself noticing corners, angles, reflections in dark glass. I laughed at myself quietly, feeling foolish. This was my husband, my home, not a crime scene, not a trap. The truth revealed itself by accident, the way truths often do. A week later, Marcus asked me to bring his old laptop down from the closet, the one he used before he upgraded to something sleeker, something more locked down. I plugged it in at the kitchen island while he took a call in his office. The laptop booted slowly, its fan whining like it was protesting being dragged back into service. I clicked around, looking for the files he wanted, when a folder on the desktop caught my eye. It wasn't labeled with numbers or projects or anything business-related. It was simply called home. I didn't mean to open it. I tell myself that even now, but something in my chest tightened the moment I saw it. Like my body already knew what my mind hadn't caught up to yet. Inside were dozens of video files, time-stamped, organized by date, by room. Living room 0812, kitchen 0812, bedroom 0813. My mouth went dry. I clicked one. The screen filled with a wide-angle view of my living room, our living room, the couch I had chosen, the rug my mother said was too light for a married couple. And there I was on the screen, folding laundry, humming softly to myself, completely unaware that I was being watched. My hands started to shake. I closed the laptop so fast, the screen snapped shut with a sound like a gunshot. My heart slammed against my ribs, loud enough that I was sure Marcus could hear it from the other room. He came out a few minutes later, calm, unhurried. "You find the files?" I looked at him. Really looked at him, and realized I didn't know the man standing in front of me nearly as well as I thought I did. "Yes," I said, "they're on the desktop." He nodded, satisfied, and took the laptop without another word. That night, I didn't sleep at all. Over the next few days, pieces began to fall into place, each one heavier than the last. The way he always knew when I'd left the house, the way he commented on conversations I hadn't mentioned, the way he asked about people he shouldn't have known were in my life. The cameras weren't for security. They were for me. I confronted him a week later, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He leaned back in his chair, folded his hands, and said something that still echoes in my head when the house gets too quiet. I needed to know what was really going on when I wasn't here. That was when I understood. This wasn't about protection. It was about control, about ownership, about a man who believed marriage gave him the right to observe, to record, to archive my existence without my permission. What Marcus didn't expect, what he could never have predicted, was that the cameras didn't just record me, they recorded him. They recorded the pauses in his voice when he lied on the phone. They recorded the nights he came home later than he claimed. They recorded the way he touched me when he thought affection could cover suspicion, and the way he avoided my eyes afterward. And one afternoon, when he was supposed to be out of town, they recorded something else entirely. I was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling absently through my phone, when the front door opened. I looked up, confused, and watched my husband step inside, with a woman I had never seen before, her hand resting comfortably against his lower back, her laughter already filling the space he thought belonged only to him. The camera caught everything. The kiss, the familiarity, the way he led her down the hallway, like the house had always been hers too. And in that moment, standing in my own kitchen, watching my life fracture in real time on a screen meant to imprison me, I realized something Marcus never did. The moment you start watching someone instead of trusting them, you stop controlling the story. You start recording your own downfall. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't move at all. I just sat there, my fingers curled tightly around my phone, watching the footage play out in my mind with a clarity that felt almost surgical. Shock doesn't always come as chaos. Sometimes it arrives as stillness, so complete it feels like your soul has stepped a few inches outside your body to observe the damage without interference. The woman was younger than me. Not dramatically so, but enough to sting. Her hair was glossy, styled in loose waves that bounced when she laughed. She wore heels inside my house, walking across the floors I polished every weekend, without hesitation, without reverence. Marcus leaned down and whispered something in her ear, and she smiled in a way that told me this wasn't her first time here. This wasn't a mistake. This was routine. I didn't confront him that day, or the next, or the one after that. Instead, I learned. I learned how long he stayed when I wasn't home. I learned which rooms he favored with her. I learned how differently he spoke to her, lighter, almost careless, as if the weight he carried around me simply didn't exist when she was there. I learned that the cameras he installed to watch me had captured months of evidence he never thought to delete, never imagined I would find. Every night, after he fell asleep beside me, his breathing slow and even, I slipped out of bed and returned to the laptop. I watched quietly, headphones on, memorizing timestamps, patterns, habits. I became fluent in his deception. There was a strange intimacy to it, knowing him this way, stripped of his justifications and excuses, seeing the truth without his voice narrating it. The worst part wasn't the sex. It wasn't even the lies. It was how comfortable he was. Comfortable betraying me. Comfortable assuming I would never know. Comfortable believing the power he had over me was absolute. Weeks passed, then months. Marcus grew bolder. He stopped hiding his irritation when I asked questions. He criticized small things. How I folded towels, how I seasoned food, how long I spent on the phone. The cameras, I realized, weren't just tools of observation. They were weapons. He used what he saw to shape his behavior toward me, to preempt my emotions, to stay one step ahead. But what he didn't understand was that surveillance cuts both ways. One evening, he came home unusually tense, his jaw set tight, his movements sharp. He barely touched his dinner, barely looked at me. Afterward, he disappeared into his office, locking the door behind him. The cameras caught that too. The pacing, the phone calls, whispered under his breath. The anger he tried to keep contained. That was the night I decided I was done being watched. I copied everything, every file, every timestamp, every clip that showed his infidelity, his lies, his manipulation. I backed them up twice, stored them in places he would never think to look. I became meticulous, methodical, calm. Revenge, I learned, doesn't require rage. It requires patience. The opportunity presented itself sooner than I expected. Marcus had a public image to maintain. A respected consultant, a frequent speaker at corporate ethics seminars. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't been so cruel. He was scheduled to give a keynote at a private leadership retreat, an event attended by investors, colleagues, and, most importantly, his board. I offered to attend with him. He seemed surprised, suspicious, but he agreed, likely believing that a devoted wife at his side only reinforced the image he'd worked so hard to cultivate. That night, I wore the dress he loved most, the one he always said made me look polished. I smiled when appropriate. I laughed when expected. I played my role flawlessly. When Marcus took the stage, confident and composed, speaking about transparency and trust, I felt something inside me finally settle into place. Because I knew what was coming. The presentation ended. Applause filled the room. And then the moderator announced a short video segment. Something Marcus hadn't mentioned to me beforehand. His expression flickered, just briefly. But he didn't stop it. He couldn't. The screen behind him lit up. At first, the footage looked harmless. A living room, a kitchen, familiar spaces. People shifted in their seats, curious. Then Marcus appeared, then the woman. The room went silent in a way I will never forget. Not gasps, not murmurs, just stunned, suffocating quiet as the truth unfolded, without commentary, without explanation. The timestamps were clear. the context undeniable. Marcus turned slowly, his face draining of color as he realized what was happening. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time since our marriage began to rot, I saw fear, not anger, not denial, fear. The footage ended. The screen went black. No one clapped. I stood. I didn't know how else to protect myself. I said calmly, my voice steady. Despite the pounding in my chest, the cameras were installed without my consent. The recordings were not mine to begin with. But the truth belongs to everyone. I left before anyone could stop me. The aftermath was swift, ruthless. Contracts dissolved. Invitations disappeared. Friends chose sides. Marcus tried to call, to text, to explain. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. The cameras came down eventually. I watched them being removed, one by one, the holes in the walls patched over, like scars that had finally begun to heal. Sometimes, late at night, I think about how close I came to never knowing, to living inside a lie, carefully curated by someone who claimed to love me. And then I remember this. The moment someone starts watching you instead of trusting you, they stop being your partner. They become your witness, and witnesses don't control the truth. They reveal it. The silence that followed didn't feel like relief. It felt like standing in the aftermath of a storm. The air heavy, debris everywhere, and the unsettling knowledge that what was destroyed could never be rebuilt the same way again. I moved out of the house within a week, not because Marcus asked me to leave, but because I could no longer breathe inside walls that had once listened to me without my consent. Every corner felt compromised. Every shadow felt like an eye that hadn't fully closed yet. I took only what I needed: clothes, documents, personal things that still felt like mine. I didn't take the furniture, or the framed photos, or the decorative pieces we'd collected over the years as proof of a shared life. Those things belonged to the version of me who believed in him. She wasn't coming with me. Marcus tried everything after that. Apologies delivered with shaking hands, anger disguised as heartbreak, long emails analyzing what went wrong, as if our marriage were just another failed project he could dissect and reframe. He blamed stress. He blamed temptation. He blamed me, delicately, almost politely, suggesting that if I had been more present, more attentive, less distant, he wouldn't have felt the need to look elsewhere. He never once acknowledged the cameras as violence. He spoke of them like tools that had simply been misunderstood. I stopped reading his messages eventually. Healing doesn't come from repeatedly reopening the wound to see if it still hurts. The legal process dragged on, slow and invasive in its own way. Lawyers asked questions that felt clinical, detached from the emotional wreckage behind them. They wanted timelines, evidence, proof. I provided everything. I didn't embellish. I didn't dramatize. The truth was heavy enough on its own. Friends reacted differently. Some rallied around me fiercely, outraged on my behalf. Others grew distant, uncomfortable with the messiness of it all. Betrayal, I learned, makes people nervous. It forces them to imagine themselves in your place, and not everyone is brave enough to do that. A few quietly sided with Marcus, seduced by his calm explanations and polished regret. I let them go too. There were nights when the loneliness pressed in so hard it felt physical, like a weight on my chest. Nights when I questioned myself, replayed moments, wondered if I could have done something differently. Self-doubt is a stubborn companion after gaslighting. Even when you know the truth, it whispers alternatives, softer versions that hurt less to accept. But then I would remember the footage, the certainty of it, the clarity, and the whispers would fade. I started therapy. Not because I felt broken, but because I wanted to understand how I'd missed the warning signs. How a relationship could erode so quietly while I was busy maintaining the illusion of stability. My therapist said something during one of our sessions that stayed with me. Control often disguises itself as concern, she said, and by the time it reveals its true face, you've already been trained to doubt your instincts. That explained so much. Months passed, the divorce finalized, the house sold. Marcus faded into the background of my life, a cautionary tale rather than a central character. I heard through mutual acquaintances that his career never fully recovered, that the video followed him in quiet ways, resurfacing just when he thought it had been buried. Reputation, once cracked, doesn't heal cleanly. As for me, I moved into a smaller place. Sunlight filled it in the afternoons. The walls were bare at first, then slowly adorned with pieces chosen only for myself. No cameras, no secrets, just space. Sometimes I still think about the woman he brought into our home. I don't hate her. She was a symptom, not the disease. I hope she learned something from it all. I hope she walked away before becoming someone else's footage. People ask me now if I regret exposing everything so publicly. If I wish I'd handled it quietly, privately, spared him the humiliation. I tell them the truth. Silence protects abusers. Exposure protects the truth. My husband installed cameras to watch me, to control a narrative he thought belonged to him alone. What he didn't understand was that the moment he pressed record, he surrendered the ending. Because the truth doesn't need permission. It only needs light. The story didn't end cleanly after that. Stories like this never do. They just grow quieter, more internal, unfolding in places no one else can see. On the surface, my life looked settled again. New routines, new address, new last name, waiting patiently in legal documents I hadn't yet signed. But beneath that calm, something else was happening, something slower and more unsettling. I had spent years being observed without knowing it. That kind of violation doesn't disappear just because the cameras are gone. It rewires you. For a long time, I caught myself adjusting my behavior, even when I was alone, lowering my voice during phone calls, straightening objects that didn't need straightening, pausing before sitting down as if waiting for some invisible permission. Trauma doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers instructions long after the threat is gone. There were moments, late at night, when I would suddenly feel exposed for no reason at all. I would look around the room, heart racing, convinced for a split second that I'd missed something, that there was still a lens tucked into a corner, quietly collecting data. I checked anyway, every time. Healing, I learned, isn't linear. It circles back on itself, testing you, asking if you're really ready to feel safe again. Marcus tried one last time to reclaim control months after the divorce was finalized. It came in the form of a letter, handwritten, delivered to my new address without explanation. Seeing his handwriting again made my stomach drop. Some part of me had hoped he'd finally let me go. He wrote about growth, about regret, about how public shame had forced him to reflect on his actions. He said he understood now why what he did was wrong, that the cameras had been a mistake born out of fear. He said he forgave me. That last line told me everything I needed to know. He still believed he was the one granting absolution, still believed the story revolved around him. I didn't respond. Instead, I folded the letter carefully and placed it at the bottom of a drawer, not as a keepsake, but as evidence. Proof that even stripped of power, some people never stop trying to rewrite reality. Time did what it always does. It softened the sharpest edges. I laughed again without forcing it. I slept through the night more often than not. I let people get close in small, cautious increments. Trust returned slowly, like a muscle relearning how to move after being injured. One evening, while hosting a small dinner for friends, I realized something that startled me with its simplicity. I hadn't once wondered how I looked, how I sounded, or how the moment might appear from another angle. I was just present, unrecorded, unfiltered, alive in a way I hadn't been for years. Later, after everyone left, I stood alone in my kitchen. The same kind of quiet settling around me as before, but it felt different now. Peaceful, earned. I leaned against the counter and let myself breathe deeply, fully, without fear of being analyzed or archived. That was when it finally hit me. The cameras had taken something from me. Yes, privacy, safety, innocence. But they had also revealed something I might never have seen otherwise. The cost of staying silent, the danger of confusing control for love, the strength that surfaces when you stop waiting for permission to protect yourself. Marcus thought watching me would give him certainty, control, power. What he didn't understand was that the moment he stopped trusting me, he exposed himself to the truth, to consequence, to a version of me he never anticipated. Because I was never the one trapped by those cameras. I was the one who learned how to turn them into mirrors. And once you see someone clearly, once you really see them, you don't need revenge. You just need to walk away, carrying your truth with you, knowing that no one will ever get to watch your life again unless you invite them to. Even now, long after everything settled into something that resembled peace, the experience still follows me in quiet ways. Not as fear anymore, but as awareness, a sharpened sense of perception that never fully dulls again once it's been awakened. I notice patterns more easily, tone shifts, the difference between curiosity and control, the way some questions are asked not to understand, but to measure. There was a time when I would have ignored those things, smoothed them over in the name of harmony. I was raised to believe that love meant endurance, that commitment meant accommodation, that a good wife made herself smaller when things felt tense, easier to manage, easier to keep. The cameras shattered that belief completely. They forced me to confront a truth that had been waiting patiently beneath the surface of my marriage. I had been disappearing long before I was being watched. When people hear my story now, they often fixate on the spectacle of it, the exposure, the public unraveling. They ask how I found the courage to do something so drastic. I always want to tell them the same thing. Courage wasn't the first thing I felt. Fear was, confusion, grief. Courage came later, after I realized that staying silent would cost me more than speaking ever could. There's a moment I replay sometimes, not because it hurts, but because it reminds me how close I came to staying. It's from one of the earlier recordings, before I knew about the affair, before everything fell apart. I'm standing in the kitchen, laughing softly at something on my phone. Marcus is behind the camera, unseen. I remember that day. I remember thinking briefly that I felt happy, that the marriage was finally settling into something comfortable. Watching it afterward was surreal. seeing myself content inside a lie I didn't know I was living. It taught me something important. Happiness without autonomy isn't happiness, it's sedation. I threw that clip away, deleted it permanently. Some moments don't deserve to be preserved. I moved forward slowly after that, deliberately. I changed jobs, not because I had to, but because I wanted a clean break from the version of myself who rushed home every night to maintain a household that never truly felt safe. I traveled alone for the first time in my adult life. I learned the quiet confidence of navigating unfamiliar places without explanation or permission. There was something deeply healing about waking up in a room where no one knew my name, where I wasn't expected to perform a role I had long since outgrown. I dated again, cautiously. I paid attention to how men reacted to my boundaries, to the word no, to silence, to independence. Some didn't last long. Others surprised me. I learned that real intimacy doesn't rush. It doesn't demand access. It waits to be invited. Once, over dinner, someone asked me if I ever missed Marcus. The question wasn't malicious, just curious. I thought about it carefully before answering. I miss who I thought he was, I said. But I don't miss who he chose to be. That distinction matters. Every so often, I hear updates about him. Secondhand, vague. His name comes up less and less, fading into irrelevance, the way all unchecked egos eventually do. I don't feel triumph about that. Just closure. The quiet satisfaction of knowing I didn't have to destroy him to save myself. He did enough damage on his own. What stays with me most isn't the betrayal. It's the lesson underneath it. That privacy is sacred. That trust is not proven through access, but through restraint. That love doesn't monitor, it believes. If there's one thing I would tell anyone listening to this, it's this. Pay attention to how someone behaves when they think no one is watching. And pay even closer attention to how they behave when they think they are. My husband installed cameras because he was afraid of losing control. What he lost instead was the illusion that control could ever replace trust. And I gained something far more valuable than the marriage I walked away from. I gained myself, fully present, unobserved, unowned, and for the first time in a very long time, that feels like freedom. There is a strange quiet that comes after you reclaim yourself. Not the dramatic kind people expect, not celebration or triumph, but a softer silence that feels earned. It's the sound of no longer explaining yourself, no longer anticipating reactions, no longer adjusting your behavior to avoid someone else's suspicion. For a long time, I mistook that quiet for emptiness. I worried that maybe I had lost something essential along with the marriage. But slowly, gently, I realized it wasn't emptiness at all. It was space. Space to notice how my shoulders finally relaxed when I walked into my own home. Space to sit on the couch in the dark without reaching for my phone. Without wondering how the moment might be interpreted or remembered. Space to exist without an audience. I stopped flinching when doors opened behind me. That took longer than I expected. Trauma leaves residue in the nervous system, not just in memory. Even months later, a sudden noise would still spike my pulse. My body reacting before my mind could catch up. But each time, the recovery came faster. My breathing steadied more quickly. My thoughts returned to the present. Healing didn't erase the past. It taught me how to live alongside it, without letting it drive. I began to trust my instincts again, tentatively at first. That was perhaps the most important part. Marcus hadn't just violated my privacy. He had trained me, subtly and systematically, to doubt my own perceptions. If I felt uneasy, he framed it as insecurity. If I asked questions, he framed it as paranoia. Over time, I learned to override my intuition in favor of his explanations. Undoing that damage required patience and compassion for myself. I had to relearn that discomfort is not something to be managed away. It's information. There was a moment, about a year after everything ended, when I was invited to a small gathering at a friend's house. Someone new was there, someone charming, attentive, asking thoughtful questions. On the surface, there was nothing wrong with him, but something felt off. Not threatening, just invasive. He leaned in too close. Asked for details that weren't offered, smiled when I deflected, as if it were a game. Old me would have ignored that feeling. New me excused myself early and went home. I didn't second-guess the decision. I didn't analyze whether I was being unfair or overly cautious. I trusted myself. That alone felt like a victory. The irony is that Marcus always claimed he installed the cameras because he was afraid of losing me. But the truth is, he had already lost me long before I found them. He lost me the moment he decided my autonomy was a threat instead of a gift. He lost me when he chose surveillance over conversation, control over vulnerability. Sometimes I imagine an alternate version of our life, one where he came to me honestly with his fears, one where he trusted me enough to let me remain unknown in certain ways. I don't linger on that version for long. It doesn't exist, and dwelling there serves no one. What does exist is this life, the one I built deliberately, brick by brick, boundary by boundary, the one where love is not proven through access, but through respect, where intimacy is mutual, not extracted, where privacy is not something you have to fight for inside your own home. People talk a lot about closure, as if it's a single moment, a conversation, an apology that ties everything up neatly. That wasn't my experience. Closure came in fragments. In mornings where I woke up without dread. In evenings where I laughed freely. In the realization that Marcus no longer occupied my thoughts unless I invited him there. Closure wasn't something he gave me. It was something I took back. I sometimes think about the cameras themselves, about the cold logic behind them, the assumption that seeing everything would reveal the truth. But the truth doesn't live in footage alone. It lives in context, in intent, in what someone does with the power they hold. Marcus saw everything and understood nothing. He watched my life unfold and still failed to recognize my humanity. He reduced me to data points, patterns, behaviors to be managed, and in doing so, he revealed something far more damning than infidelity or jealousy. He revealed who he was when he thought no one would hold him accountable. That, more than anything, is what the cameras caught. They caught a man who believed love was possession, who believed trust was optional, who believed observation could replace intimacy. And they caught a woman who, once she realized she was being watched, refused to remain silent. If you're listening to this and something inside you feels tight, uneasy, familiar, I want you to pay attention to that feeling. Not everything dangerous announces itself loudly. Some things arrive disguised as concern, as protection, as love. But real love does not require access to every part of you. Real love does not need to watch, and anyone who insists otherwise is telling you exactly who they are, whether you're ready to hear it or not. My husband installed cameras because he thought it would keep him safe. What it did instead was set me free. Freedom, I discovered, isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks or grand declarations. It settles in quietly, almost shyly, until one day you realize it has been living with you for a while. You notice it in the smallest moments. The way you make decisions without rehearsing explanations in your head. The way your phone stays face down on the table without anxiety curling in your stomach. The way your home feels like a sanctuary instead of a stage. I stopped keeping the lights on at night just to avoid shadows. I stopped closing doors slowly, carefully, as if sound itself might be misinterpreted. I stopped narrating my own life internally, anticipating how someone else might judge it. Those habits had formed without my permission, shaped by years of being subtly monitored, emotionally evaluated, quietly corrected. Letting them go felt like peeling away layers I hadn't realized were weighing me down. There was a day, ordinary and unremarkable on the surface, when the full weight of that freedom finally registered. I was standing in line at a grocery store, scrolling idly through my phone, when I caught my reflection in the freezer door. I looked calm, not performative calm, not the kind that's carefully constructed to keep the peace, just calm, present in my own body. I almost didn't recognize myself. That was when I understood something else, too. Healing had stopped being something I actively worked on. It had become something I lived inside of. I no longer felt the urge to prove what happened to me. For a long time after the exposure, I carried the evidence like armor, ready to defend my truth at the slightest hint of doubt. But eventually I realized I didn't need to convince anyone. The people who mattered believed me. The people who didn't were never really listening anyway. Marcus faded further into the background, his presence shrinking with time and distance. Occasionally, I would hear about him through mutual circles, new ventures that never quite took off, relationships that ended quietly, the lingering reputation that followed him like a shadow he couldn't outrun. I felt no satisfaction in that, just confirmation. Consequences don't need witnesses to be real. What stayed vivid, what stayed sharp, was the lesson, not just about him, but about myself. About how easily love can slide into control if you're taught that endurance is virtue and sacrifice is proof of commitment. About how dangerous it is to normalize discomfort in the name of keeping something intact. About how quickly a woman's intuition is dismissed, even by herself, when she's told too often that she's overreacting. I started speaking up more, not loudly, not aggressively, but clearly. When something didn't sit right, I said so. When I didn't want to share something, I didn't. No justifications. No apologies. Boundaries became less like walls and more like doors I could open and close at will. There was a moment, during a quiet conversation with a close friend, when she said, almost offhandedly, "You seem different, lighter." I smiled, because she was right. I wasn't lighter because something had been taken away. I was lighter because something heavy had finally been put down. The cameras once turned my life into footage. into something observable, replayable, subject to interpretation. Now, my life exists only in moments, fleeting, unrecorded, belonging solely to me and the people I choose to share it with. There is power in that kind of impermanence, safety in knowing that not everything needs to be documented to be real. If I've learned anything from all of this, it's that control thrives in secrecy, but so does freedom. The difference lies in who holds it. Surveillance strips humanity away. Trust restores it. And no relationship, romantic or otherwise, should ever require you to surrender your sense of self in exchange for security. My husband installed cameras because he believed love could be verified through observation. What he never understood is that love isn't something you capture. It's something you honor. And once that truth settles in your bones, once you truly accept it, you stop tolerating anything that asks you to live as if you're being watched. You start living as if you finally belong to yourself. And that is where the real story ends. Even after I thought the story had finished telling itself, it kept unfolding in quieter ways. The kind that don't announce their significance until much later. Growth rarely arrives as a revelation. It arrives as repetition, as choosing differently again and again until the choice no longer feels brave, just natural. I became more protective of my inner life, not secretive, there's a difference, but intentional. I stopped oversharing to earn closeness. I stopped explaining my boundaries to people who were determined to misunderstand them. I learned that access is not a right, even in love, especially in love. The right people don't demand it, they respect it. There were moments when I caught myself smiling at nothing in particular, alone in my apartment, and felt a sudden swell of gratitude so strong it surprised me. Gratitude not for what I'd gained, but for what I no longer carried. The constant low-level anxiety, the feeling of being evaluated, the subtle pressure to perform stability even when something felt wrong. Those things had been normalized in my marriage, woven so tightly into daily life that I hadn't recognized them as burdens until they were gone. I started trusting silence again. Not the tense silence of unresolved conflict, but the gentle kind that doesn't require filling. Silence that doesn't mean disconnection. Silence that simply exists. In my old life, silence felt dangerous, like something unseen might be happening in it. Now, it felt like rest. Sometimes, when I reflect on everything that happened, I think about how easily the narrative could have gone differently. How I could have discovered the cameras, confronted Marcus privately, accepted his excuses, and convinced myself it was a misguided act of love. How I could have stayed. How many people do stay, quietly adapting to a life that grows smaller each year because leaving feels too disruptive, too dramatic, too costly. That thought humbles me. It reminds me that survival often looks like compliance until someone decides it doesn't have to anymore. I don't see myself as exceptional for what I did. I see myself as someone who reached a limit, someone who realized that dignity isn't something you negotiate for inside your own marriage. It's something you either have or you don't. And once you recognize that it's been taken from you, you can't unsee it. There are still days when I feel the echo of who I used to be. The woman who tried harder, who gave the benefit of the doubt until there was nothing left to give. I don't judge her. I honor her. She did the best she could with the information she had at the time. And when she finally had enough information to see the truth, she acted. That's the part of the story I hold on to most. Not the betrayal, not the exposure, but the moment of clarity. The moment when denial gave way to resolve, when fear stepped aside and made room for self-respect. If my story has any purpose beyond my own life, I hope it's this: that someone listening recognizes themselves in the quiet details, in the unease they've been dismissing, in the questions they've been afraid to ask, in the feeling that something isn't quite right, even if they can't yet explain why. You don't need proof to trust your instincts. You don't need permission to protect your peace, and you don't owe anyone access to your life at the expense of your safety, your autonomy, or your sense of self. My husband installed cameras to watch me, believing that visibility would give him control. What it gave me was clarity. And clarity, once it arrives, doesn't leave. It stays with you. It guides you. It quietly reshapes the rest of your life. Even after years had passed, certain moments still caught me off guard. A knock at the door that sounded too sharp. The way a stranger's gaze lingered just a moment too long. A news story about privacy violations or surveillance that made my chest tighten. Those moments weren't fear anymore. They were reminders, echoes of a lesson learned too painfully to forget. Vigilance doesn't mean paranoia. Awareness doesn't mean suspicion. They simply mean survival. I began to notice patterns in myself I hadn't recognized before. How easily I had allowed another person's perception to define my worth. How quickly I had been willing to question my own judgment rather than confront his. How small concessions, repeated over time, had become invisible chains. And every time I noticed it, I reminded myself, I would never go back. I would never let someone else's fear masquerade as concern, dictate the boundaries of my life again. I took up routines that grounded me. Morning walks where the sunlight touched my face directly. No blinds, no curtains, no cameras watching. Journaling late at night, scribbling thoughts without concern for anyone reading them. Practicing saying no out loud, just to feel the sound of my own voice asserting itself. It was exhausting at first, but slowly it became habitual, empowering, necessary. There were moments when friends or colleagues expressed curiosity about the whole ordeal. Some were fascinated, others horrified. But I rarely spoke in detail. I didn't need validation. I didn't need sympathy. I only needed to observe the reactions of others to confirm that I had reclaimed my autonomy. The cameras had tried to frame my life for someone else. Now, I chose how my story existed in the world. One evening, months later, I hosted a quiet dinner for a few close friends. The conversation drifted, laughter filling the room like a soft soundtrack to the ordinary peace I'd been cultivating. As I moved from the kitchen to the dining table carrying plates of food, I realized something remarkable. I wasn't thinking about who was watching. I wasn't adjusting my movements. I wasn't anticipating judgment. I was simply present, fully, completely present. That realization struck me with a joy that was almost shocking. Freedom could feel this light. And yet the memory of Marcus remained, not as a tormenting shadow, but as a cautionary reminder. I would never forget the way he tried to claim ownership of my life. How he believed surveillance could substitute for trust. How easily love could become possession in the wrong hands. But I also realized that those memories, painful as they were, had made me resilient. They had taught me what boundaries really meant, what respect really required, and what self-trust truly felt like. Time went on. The cameras had long been removed. The house sold. Marcus's name faded into whispers in mutual circles. Life moved forward in the subtle, relentless rhythm it always does. I started investing more in myself. Hobbies that had been shelved, friendships that had been neglected, experiences I had postponed for years. The liberation I felt wasn't loud or dramatic. It was measured, enduring, and far more powerful than any public confrontation could have been. There were still quiet triggers. A door creaking unexpectedly. A camera lens spotted on a stranger's dashboard. A phone notification that felt like surveillance. Each time, I breathed, reminded myself of the truth I had reclaimed. I am not defined by what someone else observes. My life is mine, unrecorded, uncompromised. And that knowledge, finally internalized, gave me a sense of strength that no external force could touch. If there is a takeaway from this story, it's simple. Autonomy cannot be negotiated. Privacy is non-negotiable. And love is never verified through surveillance. The world can demand access, insist on explanation, press for transparency. But no one has the right to reduce your existence to footage, timestamps, and control. And anyone who tries to do so has revealed exactly who they are. I often think back to the moment I first discovered the cameras. That instant of horror and betrayal, and I marvel at the transformation that followed. The cameras intended to imprison me in fear and uncertainty instead became the catalyst for reclaiming my life, for understanding the power of clear boundaries, for recognizing the value of my own perception, unfiltered and unobserved. Now, years later, I move through life differently. I engage in relationships consciously, with intention. I choose who sees me, and I choose what they see. I act in accordance with my own values, not to appease the gaze of another. And when I walk into my home, I feel a kind of serenity I never experienced before. Walls that belong entirely to me. Moments that exist only because I allow them to. A life fully lived without being recorded, replayed, or judged. Marcus installed cameras because he feared uncertainty, because he believed visibility equaled control. And in that act, he unwittingly revealed his own fragility, his own need to dominate what he could not understand. But I walked away. I survived. I flourished. I reclaimed the narrative of my life. The cameras caught everything, but in the end, the one thing they never caught was me. The real me, free, whole, and unobserved. And that is the ending I live with every single day. A life reclaimed, a self restored, and a truth no one can take away.